Short is the story, long is the life.
Wukong's archive presents China Urban Legends, the Tianxin Pavilion of Changsha. The first time I heard that something was off about Tianxin Pavilion was in the summer of 2017.
That year, I had a reader named Zhou Wenbin who worked security in Changsha. Well, security. Actually, he was a night guard at Tianxin Pavilion Park. Tianxin Pavilion Park sits in the center of Changsha, at the intersection of Changnan Road and Tianxin Road, less than half a kilometer east of Nanmenkou, South Gate entrance, right next to the city's busiest pedestrian shopping district. During the day, it's packed, tourists taking photos on the ancient city wall and posting them on WeChat moments. Old folks playing chess and cards under the shade of old camphor trees. Young people spreading out picnic blankets on the grass, snacking and taking selfies. Kids chasing pigeons till their heads are dripping with sweat. It's bustling like crazy. But once the park's closing announcement blares at 9:45 p.m., the whole place flips a switch and changes face instantly.
Old Joe took this job mainly because it was close to home. He lives on Baisha Road, White Sand Road, just 5 minutes by e-bike. There were 3 night guards for Tianxin Pavilion Park, working 3 shifts. Old Joe was on the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift, making 3,600 yuan a month. He'd served 5 years in the army, took part in the 2015 flood relief in Hunan, spent a month in Shangyin soaked in water, seen dead bodies. After being discharged, he never landed a steady job, warehouse watchman, courier, hauling bricks on construction sites, he'd done it all. The Tianxin Pavilion gig didn't pay much, but it was quiet. No one would cause trouble in the park at night. He just had to do regular patrols. The rest of the time he could hang out in the guard room, even catch a nap if he was tired.
His first week there, everything was normal. After the 10 p.m. clearing, he'd follow his set patrol route, enter through the south gate, walk north along the base of the ancient city wall, past the 30-plus stone steps under the main Tianxin Pavilion building, circle around the main structure, turn onto the east gate path, then come back down through the forest trail on the north slope to the guard room. One loop took about 25 minutes. The whole park was dead quiet except for the streetlights along the wall and the occasional engine noise from passing cars. Changsha summer nights are muggy and hot, cicadas buzzing everywhere. But under that stretch of ancient wall at Tianxin Pavilion, it was always a few degrees cooler than anywhere else. Old Joe thought that was nice at first. No need for air conditioning in summer. Even sitting in the guard room, he could feel the chill drifting in from the wall's direction.
By the second week, he started to feel something was off. That day was a Wednesday, 2:10 a.m. Old Joe was looking at his phone in the guard room when he suddenly heard a sound outside. He said the sound was very faint, intermittent, like someone crying, or like someone humming something. He didn't think much of it at first. There were plenty of stray cats in Tianxin Pavilion Park. Residents from nearby Baisha Road and Xining Street, Serenity Street, often came to feed them, and those cats would yowl all night long. But the sound went on for a long time, and it got clearer. Not a cat. Old Joe put down his phone, pricked up his ears to identify it. It was a human voice, a woman's voice. Not wailing, it was that kind of suppressed crying, throat choked up, chest heaving in spasms, like someone covering their mouth and squeezing the sound out from deep in their throat. Mixed in with the crying were mumbled, indistinct words, like someone crouching on the ground, crying and talking at the same time, but the words were impossible to make out.
Old Joe figured he wasn't exactly a coward. Back during the flood relief in Shangyin, when the floodwaters swallowed half the village, he carried 12 people out of collapsed houses in one night. He'd seen dead bodies face danger. He took his flashlight off the wall hook, pushed open the door, walked outside, and stood at the entrance of the guard room, turning his ear to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. The wind was blowing from the south, and the sound rose and fell with it. He locked onto it. It was coming from the direction of the ancient city wall. The ancient city wall at Tianxin Pavilion is the only surviving section of Changsha's Ming Dynasty, 1368 to 1644, city wall. It's about 250 meters long, 12 meters high, 8 meters wide at the base, and 5 meters wide at the top, wide enough for 2 horse-drawn carriages to pass side by side. Built from gray bricks mortared together with lime and sticky rice paste. Even after more than 400 years, those mortar joints are still hard. Weeds and moss have grown thick in the crevices. In summer, ivy covers half the southern section, making it look like a green wall from a distance. The top of the wall has crenellations and arrow slits, standard features of Ming defensive fortifications. The fact that this section of wall survived is a miracle in itself. In 1938, the Wensi Fire, a massive blaze set to deny resources to invading Japanese forces, burned down most of Changsha city, but the wall didn't fall. Later, the Japanese attacked Changsha 3 times, bombing from planes, shelling with artillery. The wall was riddled with bullet holes and pockmarked, bricks flying everywhere, yet it still stood. In the 1950s, when the whole country was tearing down city walls, most of Changsha's wall was dismantled, the bricks and stones hauled off to build the Xiangjiang River Bridge and the embankments along the river. Only this stretch at Tianxin Pavilion was spared because a TV tower and a water storage tank for the municipal water company had been built on top of it. Now when people in Changsha talk about the ancient city wall, Tianxin Pavilion is the only one they know.
Old Joe walked to the base of the wall. The closer he got, the clearer the crying became. The sound was right above his head. He raised his flashlight, and the beam swept up along the 12-meter-high gray brick surface. The bricks glowed in the flashlight with a faded color, hard to say if it was gray or yellow. Weeds poking out from the crevices swayed in the night breeze, their shadows flickered on the bricks like countless fingers gently waving. Tilting his head back, he shouted up at the wall, "Who's up there?" The crying stopped. The whole place went dead silent. The cicadas stopped. The wind died. The entire park seemed to hit a pause button. Old Joe stood at the base of the wall, his flashlight beam locked on the crenellations at the top, not moving. He waited maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Nothing. He figured it might be some homeless person who'd climbed up to sleep. That happened once in a while. He shouted again, "You can't stay up there. Come on down." Still no answer. Old Joe didn't press it. He went back to the guard room. The next night, same time, just after 2 a.m., the crying came again. This time, Old Joe was prepared. He didn't go straight over. Instead, he first pulled up the park's surveillance system.
Tianxin Pavilion Park had 16 surveillance cameras in total, mostly Dehua 1080p infrared network dome cameras, covering the main gate, parking lot, front and back of the main building, and several major paths. The ancient city wall section only had 2 cameras, one mounted on a utility pole at the south end of the wall, and one under the eaves of the main Tianxin Pavilion building at the north end. The roughly 150-meter stretch of wall in the middle was a blind spot. Old Joe pulled up the footage from the south end camera and played back the recording from 2 a.m.
In the footage, that section of the wall looked normal. Moonlight fell on the wall, giving the gray bricks a faint white sheen. No one was up there. No moving objects of any kind. Of course, the surveillance cameras themselves didn't have audio recording, so he couldn't confirm the source of the crying from the video. But at least one thing was certain, no one was walking around on top of the wall. Old Joe thought for a moment, then pulled up the night footage from the past 3 days and set it to play at 16x speed. Over those 3 days, from 1 a.m. to 3 a.m., the top of the wall was always empty. Not even a cat had crossed that stretch. So that meant, if the crying was coming from a person, that person couldn't be standing on top of the wall, because both cameras, one at the south and one at the north, covered every inch of the wall's top. Old Joe said that early morning, he sat in the guard room, staring at the surveillance screen, thinking a lot. He came to two conclusions: either there was some blind spot on the wall where the cameras couldn't see, and someone was hiding in a dead angle, or those sounds weren't coming from above the wall at all, but from inside the wall. On the third night, old Joe decided to try a different approach to verify. At 11 p.m., instead of going into the guard room, he carried a folding chair out and sat down on the stone steps at the park's south gate entrance. That spot faced directly toward the southern section of the ancient wall, with a wide-open view. From the base to the top, every single brick on that southern stretch was in his line of sight. He wanted to see with his own eyes, in an area with no camera blind spots, what exactly would happen on that wall. That night, the moon was huge. It was the 15th day of the 6th lunar month. Moonlight lit up the entire park, making the texture of every gray brick on the wall crystal clear. Old Joe sat down on the stone steps, lit a cigarette, and stared at the wall.
Outside the park, on Chengnan Road, the occasional taxi drove by. Farther off, from the direction of the pedestrian street, the muffled sound of karaoke drifted over. Someone was singing Love Until Death. *AI le do yao AI*, hitting a high note and cracking, audible even 2 blocks away. Changsha's nightlife is lively. Even at 1 or 2 a.m., there are still people out grabbing late-night snacks. The Wenhiu Old Changsha Lobster Restaurant, right next to Tianxin Pavilion, is at its busiest around that time. But between the world inside Tianxin Pavilion Park and the world outside, it was like there was an invisible membrane. The louder and more bustling the outside got, the quieter it was inside. The ancient city wall squatted there like a giant that had fallen silent for 400 years, casting the whole park under a huge shadow.
Around 1:45 a.m., old Joe said, he felt the temperature suddenly drop by several degrees. Changsha July nights are muggy and hot. Sitting still outside, you'd be soaked in sweat in no time. But in that instant, all the hairs on his arms stood up, and goosebumps broke out on his skin. He looked up at the sky. The moon was still hanging there. No clouds had drifted over, no wind had picked up. The temperature shift had no external cause. It was just the air around that section of the wall, suddenly turning cold. And then he heard the crying.
Lao Zhou said the sweat poured down his back right then. When he was in the army, he'd taken part in live-fire drills. Bullets whizzing over his head, and he never panicked. But that early morning, sitting alone on the stone steps of the empty Tianxin Pavilion Park, listening to a woman's crying coming from inside that ancient city wall with no one on it, he admitted he was scared. That fear didn't come from a specific thing. It came from a kind of unexplainable absurdity. Your eyes tell your brain, there's nobody up there. Your ears tell your brain, someone is crying. Your brain can't handle these contradictory signals. So fear seeps out from that unbridgeable gap and trickles down your spine.
He didn't run. He stood up, turned on his flashlight, and walked step by step to the foot of the wall. He took a deep breath, and then he did something even he later found unbelievable. He pressed the palm of his right hand against the gray brick.
The brick surface was icy cold. Not the normal cool of a summer night. That cold pierced through the skin and burrowed straight into the bone. Lao Zhou said that in Changsha, July daytime temperatures can reach 37 or 38 degrees Celsius, about 99 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. After a full day in the sun, the gray brick wall should still be warm at midnight. He touched it during daytime patrols, and the sun-baked bricks were too hot to hold for long. But it was past 1 in the morning, and the brick surface of that section of wall felt like stone just dug out of an underground ice cellar. He pressed his ear against it. The crying was clearer. It wasn't coming from far away. It was indeed coming from inside the brick wall, as if someone had been built into the wall itself, crying out through 2 layers of brick.
Lao Zhou said only one thought crossed his mind at that moment: this wall is alive.
After returning to the guardhouse, Lao Zhou tossed and turned, unable to sleep. He spent the whole night searching the history of Tianxin Pavilion, Tianxin Pavilion, on his phone. He wouldn't have known if he hadn't checked. But the more he looked, the more he realized that this city wall had a much deeper background than he imagined. Tianxin Pavilion was first built during the Hanggu era of the Ming Dynasty, the time when Zhu Yuanzhang was emperor, roughly from 1368 to 1398. At that time, the Changsha prefectural government built this tower on the high ground in the southeast corner of the city to strengthen its defenses. Over the following centuries, Changsha's ancient city wall underwent many large-scale repairs. It was rebuilt in the Changhua era, given a major overhaul in the Qianlong era of the Qing dynasty, and reinforced again in the Daoguang era. This section at Tianxin Pavilion was always the most important defensive fortification of the entire Changsha wall, because it was the highest point in the city. Standing on the tower, you could overlook the whole city of Changsha and both banks of the Xiang River. Whoever controlled Tianxin Pavilion controlled Changsha. If you counted all the battles Changsha had gone through in history, you could write a book. From the late Yuan and early Ming dynasties to the late Qing and early Republic, over 600 years, this city had experienced at least 100 sieges and assaults. But the most tragic and most legendary battle took place in 1852. That autumn, Xiao Chaogui, the western king of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, led 12,000 elite troops from Chenzhou, northward and arrived at the gates of Changsha. Xiao Chaogui was one of the core figures of the early Taiping movement. He was the brother-in-law of Hong Xiuquan, and Feng Yunshan, and together with Hong Xiuquan, Yang Xiuqing, Feng Yunshan, Wei Changhui, and Shi Dakai. They were known as the 6 early leaders of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. Historical records describe him as fierce and brave beyond ordinary men, always the first to charge in battle. Starting from the Jintian uprising, he had fought in countless battles, capturing Yong'an, attacking Guilin, taking Chuanzhou, occupying Daozhou, winning victory after victory with almost no defeats. Known among the Taiping troops as the Flying General. In July of 1852, Xiao Chaogui's vanguard reached the south gate of Changsha. Without waiting for the main force, he immediately ordered an assault on the city. The Taiping army set up cannons on Miaogao Peak, that small hill less than 300 meters directly south of Tianxin Pavilion. South of the gate, below Tianxin Pavilion, cannon fire shook the heavens and smoke filled the air. The Taiping troops divided into 3 echelons and attacked in continuous waves, day and night. The Qing army poured rolling logs, rocks, and boiling lime water down from the wall. All the civilian houses south of the gate were demolished by the Taiping army, and the timber was used to build scaling ladders and battering rams.
The most brutal battlefield was right below this section of the wall at Tianxin Pavilion.
On September 12, 1852, Xiao Chaogui personally went to the front line to supervise the battle. He stood on Miaogao Peak and used a telescope to observe the defenses around Tianxin Pavilion, looking for weak points. But he didn't realize that the Qing artillerymen on the wall were also watching him. According to the Qing historical text, a record of suppressing the Guangdong bandits, the artilleryman on the wall was named Hulini, not the Hulini who later served in Zhang Guofan's Xiang army, but a local artillery platoon commander in the Changsha garrison who happened to share the same name. This man aimed for a long time, fired a single cannon shot, and hit his target. The cannonball pierced through Xiao Chaogui's chest and abdomen, exiting through his back. Historical records say his chest and abdomen were both torn open, and he died on the spot. The Western king Xiao Chaogui, only 30 years old, died less than 200 meters from the base of the Tianxin Pavilion wall. As soon as Xiao Chaogui died, the Taiping offensive immediately weakened. The remaining Taiping troops secretly transported his body back to Qinzhou for burial, but the siege of Changsha was not immediately lifted. Hong Xiuquan and Yang Xiuqing's main force arrived from Qinzhou more than 20 days later. The two armies faced off below Tianxin Pavilion for nearly 2 more months. The Taiping army dug extensive trenches and earthworks south of the city, while the Qing army kept watch day and night on the wall. They fought over a dozen skirmishes with several hundred casualties on each side. But in the end, the Taiping army could never breach this section of the wall at Tianxin Pavilion. The cannon fire had loosened and shattered the bricks, but the wall never collapsed. At the end of November, after consuming huge amounts of manpower and ammunition, the Taiping army had to lift the siege and march north to attack Wuchang instead. To this day, many shell holes and cannon scars remain on the Tianxin Pavilion wall. Some left from 1852, some from later wars, all mixed together so you can't tell which battle each one came from. When Lao Zhou read this history, he sat in the guardhouse for a long time. He later told me, "Every day when I patrol, I pass the southern section of the wall. There's a row of iron railings there now, and tourists like to lean against them for photos. Next to the railings is an information board about the history of Tianxin Pavilion, but it doesn't mention Xiao Chaogui at all. Those young people leaning on the railings taking selfies have no idea that on the very spot where they stand, 165 years ago, a cannonball once killed a prince of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. The crater from that cannonball is still on the wall. It's just a dent with a darker color than the surrounding brick, looking no different from the wear and tear on any ordinary brick. But 1852 was far from the only war Tianxin Pavilion had witnessed. There was more blood to come. In the early hours of November 13, 1938, a fire broke out in Changsha that shocked China and the world. The Wenxi Fire, or the Great Fire of Changsha. In October of that year, after Wuhan fell to the Japanese army advanced south along the Yuehan Railway, and Hunan became the front line of the War of Resistance. Zhang Zhizhong, then chairman of the Hunan provincial government, formulated a scorched earth policy at a pre-war meeting. If Changsha could not be held, they would burn the city, leaving not a single grain of rice or inch of iron for the Japanese. Fan Ti, the Changsha garrison commander, was responsible for the actual execution. Over 100 fire-starting squads were set up across the city, each equipped with gasoline drums and torches, standing by at various key points in the urban area. Every citizen of Changsha knew about the plan, but no one knew exactly which day it would be carried out.
That night, the order came too early.
Just after midnight on November 12, 1938, in other words, the early morning of the 13th, a hospital for wounded soldiers south of the Changsha city gate accidentally caught fire. The flames spread quickly with the autumn wind. The fire-starting squad stationed to watch over the southern part of the city saw the blaze outside the south gate and mistook it for the signal. According to the plan, the first fire was supposed to be lit in the south. Then the rest of the city would follow in sequence. The Southern Fire Squad immediately began igniting their designated areas. Citizens woke from their sleep to find the streets full of flames. Then the fire squads in the north, east, and west saw fire everywhere and assumed the signal had reached their sectors, so they too started lighting fires. Within less than 3 hours, the entire city of Changsha had turned into a boundless sea of fire.
The fire burned for 5 days and 5 nights before it went out on its own. Yes, no fire brigade came to put it out, because the city's entire firefighting system had been destroyed in the first few hours. Over 90% of the city's buildings were reduced to ashes. According to post-war statistics, more than 30,000 citizens died in the fire. They were not killed by the Japanese, they were burned to death by the fire set by their own people. Those who couldn't escape their homes were burned alive in their beds. Those who ran into the streets were crushed by collapsing houses. Those who fled to the banks of the Xiang River were trampled to death. A huge number of bodies were buried in mass graves, several large pits south and north of the city. Later, factories and schools were built on those sites, and no one knows what lies beneath their feet.
The wooden pavilion of Tianxin Pavilion was completely destroyed in that fire, leaving only the stone base and the city wall itself. At the time, Tianxin Pavilion was one of the tallest buildings in Changsha, and the fire burning atop it turned half the sky red. A journalist took a famous photograph. In it, Tianxin Pavilion is burning, and bodies lie scattered on the streets below the wall. The three-story pavilion that now stands on Tianxin Pavilion was rebuilt in 1983 according to its original design. But as for the original pavilion from that year, nothing remains. From 1939 to 1944, the Japanese army launched 3 attacks on Changsha. This section of ancient city wall at Tianxin Pavilion, Tianxin Heart of Heaven Pavilion, because it was the highest point in the entire city, became the focus of repeated back-and-forth fighting between China and Japan. The Third Battle of Changsha, that was something that happened from December 1941 to January 1942. The Chinese 10th Army was ordered to defend Changsha to the death. A company of about 120 men was stationed on the wall at Tianxin Pavilion. Their mission was simple. As long as we're here, the wall stays here.
That battle was fought until the sky dimmed and the earth went dark. The Japanese planes and artillery flattened most of the battlements along the wall. The wall's blue bricks were blasted into pieces, broken bricks and shrapnel mixed together in a thick layer. But the Chinese troops didn't retreat. They used sandbags and brick fragments to build makeshift bunkers, and held off the Japanese charges with light machine guns and grenades. The company commander, surnamed Zhang, was from Sichuan. During the fighting, a shell fragment hit his left arm and broke the bone. He cinched a tourniquet around the wound and kept commanding. After 3 days and 3 nights of fighting, fewer than 40 men were still standing. When reinforcements arrived, Commander Zhang was carried down from the wall. His left arm had already turned black and was rotting, but the first thing he said on the stretcher was, "Did we hold the wall?"
Old Zhou, Lao Zhou, said that when he found this historical record, he stayed silent for a long time in the duty room. He stopped, put his phone on the table, walked to the door of the duty room, and looked at the ancient city wall in the night, that wall he patrolled and touched every single day. It crouched there in silence, looking no different from any old wall. But now he knew where those shell craters came from. He knew what those patches of deep and shallow color on the wall were. They were scorch marks from fire. It was blood, dried thoroughly, fused into the brick surface. After old Zhou learned this history, he called me one day and said something that stuck with me. He said, "Old Yang, Lao Yang, think about it. One city wall. For 100 years worth of war. Every single blue brick has been replaced at least once. Every single mortar joint has been soaked in blood. You're telling me that I, a single man, have to guard something like that every night all alone? I'd be a fool not to have my heart pound."
I told him, that might be psychological. Once you know too much history, you start scaring yourself. He said, "No, it isn't psychological." Because he encountered something that couldn't be explained by psychology. It was the night after he finished researching that history. He was making his usual rounds. When he reached the stone steps below the main building of Tianxin Pavilion, he noticed several blue stone blocks placed on the steps. 3 stones, about the same size, each about the size of a fist, arranged in a straight line along the steps, spaced about 20 centimeters apart. They were laid out very neatly, not like something someone had thrown down randomly. Old Zhou's first reaction was, during the day there are lots of kids in the park, it's common for them to stack stones like building blocks. But it was 1 in the morning. The park gates were locked. The walls had barbed wire and broken glass on top. No one could get in. And those stones couldn't have been there before. He'd walked this same route just 2 hours ago, and the steps were completely clean. He kicked the 3 stones off the steps, then continued along his patrol route. He went to the northern end of the wall, made a loop, and then came back the same way, and the 3 stones were back on the steps, still arranged in a straight line. The spacing was exactly the same as before. Old Joe said his first thought at that moment wasn't fear, it was anger. He thought one of his co-workers was playing a trick on him. 3 night shift security guards work at Tianxin Pavilion Park. He suspected the guy who did the day-to-night handoff, a Mr. Ma, was pulling a prank. He pulled out his phone, took a photo as evidence, then crouched down, picked up the stones one by one, walked over to a trash can about 5 or 6 meters away, and dropped them in one after another. Then he didn't go back to the duty room. He walked to the shadow of an old camphor tree not far away, stood there, and stared at that section of steps. He waited about 7 or 8 minutes. Nothing happened on the steps. Old Joe was about to turn and head back, when a gust of wind blew up from the base of the wall. He said that wind wasn't ordinary, it carried an indescribable smell. Not rotting. Not earthy. It was the smell of something that had been burned by fire, charred, dry, a smell that made your throat tighten. Mixed in with it was something like the leftover scent after incense has been burned in a temple. Then he heard footsteps. Very soft. Very slow, like someone wearing cloth-soled shoes with 1,000-layer soles, strolling along the top of the wall. The footsteps came from the direction of the main building of Tianxin Pavilion, moved south along the wall, unhurried, steady step by step, and then disappeared near the southern end of the wall. Old Joe raised his flashlight again and carefully examined the top of the wall. Still empty. But the door of the main building of Tianxin Pavilion, that carved wooden door he personally checked and locked every single night, was now open a crack. The gap was about 10 centimeters wide. From inside the crack, a bottomless darkness showed through. Old Joe said he stood beneath the wall, looking up at that slightly open wooden door. He knew he had locked it. He knew the key was in his right pants pocket. No one else had a second key. He thought about it for a long time, but in the end he didn't climb up to check. He went back to the duty room, locked the door from the inside, and turned on every single light in the room, the fluorescent light, the desk lamp, the flashlight on his phone, all of them, and sat there until dawn. The first thing he did after dawn was go check that door at the main building. It was locked tight. No sign of tampering. The door fit flush, exactly the way it had been when he locked it and left the evening before. After that, Old Joe started actively learning about the history and legends of Tianxin Pavilion. He stopped treating it like an ordinary security job. One day he was on the day shift, night shift guards occasionally swap with the day shift, and he met an old man playing chess in the park. His surname was Zhang, over 70 years old, and he lived on Xining Street, Xiningjie. Old man Zhang was a regular at Tianxin Pavilion Park. Every morning at 5:30 sharp he showed up and played Chinese chess with a bunch of old buddies under the ancient camphor tree near the main building. That spot was carefully chosen, big enough shade, a stone table and stone stools, and a thermos nearby always filled with the dark tea that Hunanese, love most. Old Joe bought a pack of baisha cigarettes, sidled up, and started chatting with the old man.
Once they started talking, he found out that old man Zhang was 73 and had lived near Tianxin Pavilion most of his life. When he was a kid, in the early 1950s, the area around Tianxin Pavilion wasn't a park yet. It was a patch of low wooden houses and vegetable fields. His home was right at the base of the ancient city wall. Every time he stepped out, he looked up and saw that stretch of blue brick wall. He told Old Joe a story that had never been recorded in any public document.
In the autumn of 1958, the city of Changsha was doing urban construction and needed to widen Changnan Road, Changnanlu, South City Road. Before building the road, they had to dig the foundation. When workers dug to about a meter deep under the southern section of the wall, their shovels hit something hard. They scraped away the dirt and found human bones. Not just one or two. A whole spread. Layers upon layers of bones, skulls, ribs, leg bones, all jumbled together. The workers kept digging deeper, and the more they dug, the more they found. From just under half a meter below the surface all the way down to 3 meters deep, the human bones never stopped. People who were there at the time said there were so many bones they filled burlap sacks, and the sacks were loaded one after another onto trucks. How many bodies in total? No one counted. According to witnesses' estimates, at least 100. Later, people from the city government came, experts, they said, and after examining the bones, they declared that these bones were at least 200 or 300 years old, not from recent times, and told the workers to continue construction. Those burlap sacks were hauled away by trucks. Where they went, nobody knows. The road was quickly finished. Tianxin Pavilion Park was also built. It was as if none of it had ever happened.
But the old folks who lived on that street knew in their hearts. Starting from the early Qing Dynasty, the execution ground of Changsha Prefecture was set up outside the South Gate, right below Tianxin Pavilion. Beheadings, strangulation, death by slow slicing. All kinds of punishments were carried out there. The Qing Dynasty rule was that the execution ground had to be outside the city gate, first, as a warning. Second, for public display. This wasteland outside the South Gate was flat and open, close to the city wall, and visible to the common people. Ideal for executions. According to local gazetteers, just during the Xianfeng reign, the period of the Taiping Rebellion, Taiping Tiangua Yundong, the Qing army executed more than 2,000 so-called bandit followers outside Changsha city. No formal trial. No requirement for evidence. If someone was reported to have dealings with the Taiping army, or even just suspected, they were dragged outside the South Gate and beheaded. No one recorded those people's names. No one knows where they were buried.
Old man Zhang said something to old Joe in a heavy Changsha accent, but every word was crystal clear. He said, "Kid, you're keeping watch at Tianxin Pavilion at night. If you hear strange sounds, don't be afraid. It's not ghosts causing trouble. It's those people who died too unjustly. Their souls can't scatter. When the yin energy gets heavy, it seeps out. It won't harm you. It just wants to find someone to talk to. If you hear it, just stand there and listen for a while. You don't need to do anything. Just listen." Old Joe said that after he heard the old man's words, he didn't argue. He didn't ask any follow-up questions. He stood by the stone table, finished an entire cigarette, stubbed it out on the edge of the flower bed, and went back to the duty room.
After that, old Joe started taking this section of the wall seriously. He used his days off to go to the Changsha City Library, Changsha Shi Tushiguan, and flipped through some local gazetteers and cultural relic archives. He found that old Master Zheng's words had plenty of supporting evidence. It wasn't just the Qing Dynasty execution ground. The area around Tianxin Pavilion, Heavenly Heart Pavilion, was also a place where prisoners were executed by firing squad during the Republican era. After the May 21st incident in 1927, the Kuomintang launched a massive crackdown on communists in Changsha, and many were secretly executed beneath the southern wall of Tianxin Pavilion. In 1930, when Peng Dehuai led the Red Army to attack Changsha, the most intense fighting also took place at Tianxin Pavilion. Every time power changed hands, every time the flames of war flared up, a new batch of corpses would be added beneath the walls of Tianxin Pavilion. He also got in touch with someone through a friend, Professor Chun from the School of Architecture at Hunan University, a specialist in the site selection and feng shui layout of ancient buildings. After hearing about his experience, Professor Chun gave him an analysis from a professional perspective. Professor Chun said that the location of Tianxin Pavilion was extremely special within the old city of Changsha. Overall, Changsha's terrain is higher in the south and lower in the north, with the Xiangjiang River cutting through the city from south to north. Tianxin Pavilion sits on a high point in the southeast corner of the ancient city, at an elevation of about 70 meters, the highest point in Old Changsha. According to feng shui theory, the southeast direction belongs to the Sun position, which governs scholarly achievement and enlightenment. So ever since the Ming Dynasty, when the pavilion was first built, Tianxin Pavilion had carried the function of boosting literary style and promoting scholarly fortune. Before the imperial exams, scholars would come to burn incense, and literati would gather here to compose poetry and climb high to gaze into the distance.
But here's the problem: what lies beneath the ground?
The geological structure beneath Changsha belongs to an alternating layer of red sandstone and quaternary sediments, an ancient riverbed formation. The underground area around Tianxin Pavilion happens to be the most concentrated zone of ancient tombs in Changsha's history, from Warring States period Chu tombs to Ming and Qing burials, stacked layer upon layer underground. In 1972, the world-shocking Mawangdui Han Dynasty tombs, the burial of Lady Xian Jue, were located less than 2 kilometers in a straight line from Tianxin Pavilion. In the 1970s, during infrastructure work on the south side of Tianxin Pavilion, a batch of Eastern Han tombs was unearthed, yielding ceramic granaries, bronze mirrors, and strings of Wuzhu coins. In 1985, when Tianxin Road was being built, a late Warring States period Chu tomb was dug up, containing well-preserved lacquered wooden artifacts. So the city wall of Tianxin Pavilion isn't just built on the ground. It's built on top of thousands of years of burial layers. Professor Chun said something that old Zhou has never forgotten to this day. He said, "The location of Tianxin Pavilion is on the high ground at Nanmenku, South Gate entrance. It's a commanding point that gathers yang energy, the so-called convergence point of the city's dragon vein. But to the north and west of that section of the wall, there are 2 underground rivers. In traditional feng shui theory, underground rivers are in veins, subterranean passages of the underworld. Underground rivers aren't still water. They flow. As the old saying goes, when in water moves, ghostly energy arises. Tianxin Pavilion happens to sit right at the intersection of these 2 yin veins, meaning a place with the strongest yang energy, yet underneath it flows 2 waterways from the underworld. Add to that the centuries of accumulated white bones beneath the wall and the bloodstains that have seeped into the brick crevices. This is not the layout of a yang house. This is the layout of a yizhuang, temporary mortuary for Tingfang coffins. What is a yizhuang? It's a place where bodies are laid out in coffins, waiting for family members to claim them or for funeral rites to be performed. The place where the living dwell is called a yang house. The space for the dead is called a yizhuang. Since this place has the layout of a yizhuang, it makes perfect sense that there might be something in there that doesn't belong to this world. You spend every night in a place with a yizhuang layout, hearing something? Isn't that normal? Professor Chen also mentioned one more thing. He said the city wall of Tianxin Pavilion was built during the Ming Dynasty, and back then, the craftsmen had an unwritten rule. At the corners of the wall and beneath the foundation stones of the gates, they would bury certain items as zhenwu, suppressing objects. Usually, these were 5 grains, copper coins, and cinnabar. If conditions allowed, they would also place an iron plate engraved with talismanic symbols. The purpose of these items was to suppress the malign energy and restless spirits underground, preventing them from surging up through the wall. But during the major renovation of Tianxin Pavilion in the 1950s, workers dug up some of the old foundation stones at the base of the wall and poured concrete. In that process, the original zhenwu buried there were likely damaged or moved. Think about it, a wall with the layout of a yizhuang, and the suppressing objects have been dug up. Can the things that have been sealed inside for hundreds of years still be contained?
After old Joe heard Professor Chen's words, he was silent on the phone for a very long time. At the end of September 2017, old Joe resigned from his position as night security guard at Tianxin Pavilion Park. The reason was ordinary. His wife was pregnant with their second child, and a salary of 3,600 yuan couldn't support 2 kids. He found a job as a warehouse supervisor at a logistics company on Baisha Road, with a monthly salary of 5,500 yuan, nearly 2,000 more than at Tianxin Pavilion. On the night he left, he worked his last shift. A little past 1 in the morning, he finished his usual full patrol route. When he returned to the stone steps beneath the main building of Tianxin Pavilion, his old acquaintance showed up again. Those 3 green stone blocks were placed squarely on the steps, lined up in a straight line, each one about 20 centimeters apart. As if they knew this was his last night and had come specially to see him off.
This time he didn't throw them into the trash can. He crouched down and looked at the 3 stones for a while. Then he raised his head and said one sentence to the ancient city wall. He said, "I'm leaving. The guy who takes over after me, I don't know what kind of temper he has. You take care of yourselves."
He stood up, brushed the dust off his hands, and walked along the path out of the park gate.
As he stepped onto the plaza, he heard 3 knocking sounds from behind. Asterisk duck, duck, duck star. Very muffled. It didn't sound like stone hitting stone. More like someone tapping a brick wall with the knuckles of their fingers. Neither fast nor slow. Each knock about 2 seconds apart.
He stopped. Turned around and looked.
The ancient city wall was still the same ancient city wall, crouching silently under the moonlight. On the surface of the blue bricks, there was a faint shadow, like the outline of a human figure, that flickered and disappeared. Old Joe said he wasn't sure if he really saw anything. It could have been moonlight filtering through leaves and casting a shadow on the wall. It could have been a visual illusion caused by the wind blowing the ivy. Or maybe he was just too tense that night.
He got on his electric scooter and went home. After that, he never went to Tianxin Pavilion Park at night again. When old Joe finished telling me all these things, it was November 2017. That day, the temperature had dropped in Changsha, and he invited me to eat breakfast at a rice noodle shop on Jefeng West Road. He had already started his new job, and his daughter had just turned 1 month old. He looked much more energetic than when he was at Tianxin Pavilion, wearing the blue uniform of the logistics company, his hair cut short, and a little more flesh on his face. While I was slurping my noodles, I asked him, "Brother Joe, in the end, did you figure it out? What was that crying sound? Who was putting those stones there?" He lowered his head and thought for a while. He said, "Later on, I considered many explanations. It could have been the resonance of groundwater flowing through rock cracks beneath the wall, sounding like someone crying. It could have been an acoustic effect of wind blowing through the gaps in the wall. It could have been that day shift coworker of mine, Ma, playing a prank. Each explanation could account for part of it. But..." He pointed his chopsticks at me and said, "But old Yang, later I took my 2-year-old daughter to Tianxin Pavilion Park to play. Went during the day, in broad sunlight, the park was full of people. My daughter was running around on the lawn beneath the ancient wall, and I was watching her from the side. Suddenly she stopped, looked up at the wall, reached out her little hand, pointed up at the wall, and called out, 'Auntie.' I looked up at the wall. There was nothing up there. I asked her again, 'What did you see?' My daughter had just learned to speak short complete sentences at the time, she couldn't explain much. But she kept pointing at that spot on the wall and saying, 'Auntie, the auntie over there.'" Old Joe looked me in the eye and said, "Old Yang, a 2-year-old child doesn't lie. She doesn't make up stories either. What did she see?" "I don't know. Every morning when I patrolled the wall in the early hours, I could feel something inside that wall. My daughter felt it too. 2-year-olds are much more sensitive than us adults." He paused, picked up a strand of rice noodles with his chopsticks, and added, "I think the people inside that wall have been waiting for someone to notice them. It took me 3 months before I finally started to take the matter seriously. Maybe they've been waiting for over 150 years.
After finishing that bowl of noodles, we each went home. I walked along the streets of Changsha and passed by Tianxin Pavilion Park. In broad daylight, it was bustling inside. Tour guides holding little flags led groups to visit the ancient city wall. Tourists held up their phones to take selfies. A group of college students sat on the lawn doing team-building activities. Someone was playing guitar and singing Chengdu, horribly out of tune. A little girl held a cotton candy, and her mother crouched beside her taking photos. The ancient city wall stood quietly in the middle of it all. Under the sunlight, the blue bricks gleamed a grayish-white. The weeds growing in the crevices rustled in the wind. The shell craters on the wall from that cannon shot in 1852, that burst of machine gun fire in 1942, were still there, being gazed at, touched, and photographed by a constant stream of visitors.
On top of the wall, you couldn't see a thing. But if you ever go to Changsha next time, why not take a walk in Tianxin Pavilion Park in the evening? In the last half hour before closing time, the tourists gradually scatter, and the setting sun casts the shadow of the ancient wall long, long across the ground. Walk to the southern section of the wall, press your palm against those cool old blue bricks, close your eyes, and stand quietly for a while. You don't need to do anything else, just stand there. Maybe you won't feel a thing. Maybe you'll hear something. Not all sounds need to be heard through the ears. Some sounds, as old Joe said, appear directly in your bones. The story ends. What do you think? If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. New urban legend every day. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. New urban legend every day.